There we go. Okay. So in our session today, this is geared to help teachers really teach writing in grades 3 through 5. So if that's not one of your grades, I'm assuming some of the strategies will still be helpful to you, but I teach 4th grade. I've taught 5th grade in the past. So that's really who I was gearing this session to. So in today's session, one of the things that we'll be looking at is examining the needs of writers in your own classroom. I'm going to share some sample graphic organizers. I'm going to discuss some instructional moves that I would use in the classroom to support a variety of different learning needs. And then at the end, hopefully you'll reflect on which strategies and supports you can utilize in your own classroom. So before we get into a lot of the content, I just wanted to start off by saying writing is hard. And that's probably why so many of you have signed up today. Right off the bat, I can tell you writing is hard. So what I want you to do is I want you to think of a student in your classroom who struggles with writing. And then in the chat, type one thing that you think might make writing hard for that particular student. All right, so just looking through some of the ideas in the chat, a lot of the things that people are pointing out are things that I've been noticing with my students as well. So those are some of the things that we're going to look at today. So why writing might be hard. First of all, like many of you stated, English might not be a student's first or primary language. Some students, they just feel overwhelmed. They have no idea where to start. And so that really is a huge barrier for those students. Some students mentioned motivation. I saw that mentioned. Yeah, writing requires lots of focus and independence. So if that's something that's throwing off students, totally understandable. And the last things that I've just thought about when I'm looking at writing, some students are reading below grade level or their phonics and spelling skills are lacking. And so those things might be barriers to their success as well. So one of the good pieces of news are if we think about those things that make writing difficult, we can actually plan for a lot of those things. So that's really our purpose today, thinking about what supports can we put in place to help students with those struggles. So on the slides that I have here, you'll notice in blue, I've got something that says note-taking and something that says outline and rough draft. So I'm going to add my presentation to the chat again. This is slide 8. And what I'd like you to do is just look at both of those resources and think about the questions that are on the screen. What strategies are already in place? What types of students might benefit from those strategies? And what types of students might still struggle? So if you came in a little bit late, I will add this to the chat. If not, that's on slide 8. Okay, so does anyone want to share some of the things that they noticed in these resources? So either the note-taking form or the outline and rough draft form.
Sentence starters and also the transition words to help students organize their thoughts into paragraphs.
Okay, thank you so much
The
for
starting
sharing.
is there.
I'm noticing in the chat, I think it's, oh, they're coming in really fast. I noticed word bank. I noticed Coffee said scaffolded and color coded. So hopefully I pronounced your name correctly. Lots of people said sentence starters, definitions of words I saw from Jody. Anyone else have anything that they want to share with the group? You're at home, slow morning, I know. Most people don't want to come off on mute, come off from mute to share. That's okay. So we're going to go over some of those strategies. But when I'm creating these organizers, I'm really thinking about like how I can best support students and their success. So my screen, there we go. So one of the things that you might have noticed is I always want to make sure students know how they're graded. So that was something that is listed on the note-taking form. Let me scroll. For this specific note-taking form, boxes for the students to write in with categories. I think that's just helpful because for those of you who teach 4th grade and you know this benchmark assignment, without the categories, it's just an empty box where students have to figure out the appearance, what fits under appearance, what fits under behavior. So something like that. It was just meant to be helpful for those students. So thinking back to the students that you identified that were having difficulty with writing, here are some things that you can use. If a student doesn't know where they need to start their writing, one of the strategies that I use a lot with students is paragraph frames. And this is a really nice strategy to use. The sample you see on my screen happens to be from Unit 1 of Benchmark. But this is a nice strategy because based on the level of needs for the students, you can either add more information or less information. You can add pictures to this as well. So for any of those students, English language learners, this might be something that might be helpful. Or if you want to make it a little bit shorter, only provide sentence starters, say for specific sentences. So as an example, what's on the screen would have been for an opinion paper. And you can see that like for the last sentence, maybe that's something where students might struggle. So maybe you would leave off sentence supporters for a lot of the sentences, and then for that, where students might have difficulty, that's where you might add in that sentence starter. Any of these can be adapted for your particular students. So even listing out as far as a paper, each sentence, what you want the student to do. I've just found this to be really helpful for those students that really just don't know where to start, have limited English. So that would be something where these sentence starters would really help as well. If you have a more open-ended assignment, As an example, I often find fiction really challenging because stories can be so open-ended. So as an example, for writing a fairy tale, you might want to provide choices. And when I did that for students, I gave them options of settings to choose from. Here you can see the picture supports for your students who are emergent English speakers. You can even do that, provide choices for the problem, and students really struggling, you want to provide those solutions. You can see whether students can choose a solution that matches the problem that they chose as well. So another type of student that people mentioned were those students who really just struggle to get started. I've often found that mentor texts help a lot with this. So what I might do is I might think of strategies. As an example, if students are writing fiction, what types of ways might they want to start their piece? So maybe they want to start by describing a character, maybe they want to start by describing their setting, something like that. And then I will find examples, or I'll write my own examples that fit using that strategy. One of the things that I really like about choosing examples that other authors have written is a lot of times my students want to go and then actually read that book. So that's something that's just an extra added bonus, increasing those reading skills. For your students, again, that are still learning English, instead of using the word list like the one on the left, if you want students to add sensory details, all of those words, they're going to be a lot for a student that is learning English. So having that picture support, the document on the right shows just a quick snapshot of one of the files that I've used for students, because all those pictures match those words, makes it a little bit easier. So one less thing for those students to focus on can often be really helpful. Another strategy that I've tried with students before, class-generated brainstorms. The photograph you see on the right here, that's actually a partial picture of one of the bulletin boards I have in my classroom. Basically, I had students working in table groups to come up with words or actions that could describe those feelings that are listed. Then when students go to write, they can just visit the backboard, pick examples from that. So getting that body language into students' writing, once students have a list, all of your students really, they just can't say, I don't know what to add, because you have a place to direct them in the classroom. They can go there, they can add that information. Another strategy that has been so helpful, I have several students this year who are level 1 ESOL students. So using Google Translate, because they are really skilled in their own language. You don't often find that with students, but the ones I have this year in particular, they are fluent in their own language. So using this, both back and forth for me to communicate with them and for them to form ideas from their writing, has just been such a huge help. Over time, we will want to make sure that students are able to have those skills so they don't use Google Translate. But in the interim, this has really helped students to get those ideas into their writing, helping them understand directions. And one of the nice features, they get really good at being able to copy the text that they've put in there. So copying that English translation, and putting it right into their document, or if they're writing by hand, copying that pencil paper. You might have noticed that a lot of the resources that I present are all digital, because we do a lot of that. 4th and 5th grade, I know it's so much easier for students to type. So if you have a student, either that's a really slow typer, you have a student with spelling or phonics needs, there is a voice recording feature on Google Docs. And I have students use this. They do need a quiet space in the room. They do need to speak loud enough for the microphone to pick up their voice. But I found it just really helpful. It helps students get over that hump of, I don't know how to spell that word, or I can't write that down. So that's something that I have students use, and students are really good at technology, as I'm sure you guys all know. So once they're shown once, they become really good at it. If students are using this, just a recommendation, it really is important for them to go back and revise and edit their work, because if they don't speak clearly, the microphone might make a mistake picking up what they've said. Or if there's other noise in the room, like if you're giving a direction, it picks up what you say. So just making sure they're going back, they're checking for those mistakes, and adding punctuation in, really helpful. Another strategy that I tend to use with students, especially when I'm teaching certain grammar skills, is I like to use Nearpod. If you haven't used it before, when you create a Google Slides, there is an option. If you go to tools, you can basically add Nearpod tools, and then you can save your document and open it up in Nearpod. What Nearpod does is it's basically all your students sign on to this presentation, and it allows you to see a copy of the student's screen all at the same time. So as an example, for the slide that I have on this screen, where I was getting students to work on revision, and I really wanted to see if they could understand like what it means to revise, if they could pick out sentences that needed revision. So they would use the on-screen tools to underline or highlight the sentence that they wanted to erase. And then I could visually see on my screen what each child's computer had on there. So that was really helpful for me to just do a quick assessment. And that's also something that is really helpful. Like as an example, if you're teaching dialogue and you want to see if students know where to place commas, how to place capital letters, that's something that you can see right away, and you know where to work with students. So here's an example of a Nearpod that I would have done for that. And you can see on my snapshot, I included the tools right here at the bottom of the screen that students have access to. One other thing that I often use Nearpod for is they already have slideshows created. So if you want to add extra supports that students can go to when they finish their work, you can link to these slideshows. You can have it student-led. So basically, all a student needs to do is click into that slideshow, and as the activities come up, they complete those activities, and then that work gets automatically submitted to you. So that's something else. I don't tend to check students' work on there, but it's good practice for anybody who finishes early, anyone who needs extra support. Some of them have videos, like you can see the wide world of adjectives. That's a video on there, helps review concepts for students. And bonus, you don't need to create it. It's already created for you. So that's something that I have used in the past as early finisher activities for kids. one of the tips that I know I use, and I haven't seen a lot of people actually using this. If you're creating your assignments in my MCPS classroom, one of the things that I do for writing is I use Google Assignments. You'll notice on my screen, there's an option for Google Docs Cloud Assignment, and then there's an option for Google Assignments. When the assignment is linked to the cloud, you can't see students' progress in the actual time that they're working on it. So that's one of the reasons that I use the Google Cloud I use the Google Assignment feature instead of the Google Cloud, so that I have a copy of all the student documents all in one place. So basically, when you do that, it creates a folder in your Google Drive. It is called Assignments. And then you basically have a copy of every student file. So this works for slideshows. This works for Google Docs. So it's really helpful. And then also, you do not have to have students submit their work to see their work in progress. So when we were doing virtual learning, I would be in a breakout room and I'd have, say, 5 student pieces of work on my own screen, and I'd just be scrolling back and forth, possibly to make sure students were actually typing in their document, because we know that was an issue. And then also checking their progress, saying like, okay, now add more details about this, or just, like telling them what their next step would be, things like that. So that can be really helpful if there's anybody out there that's still teaching virtually. That would be something that you might want to look into. Another benefit of this is you can add rubrics right into the Google Assignments. A little bit, I would say it's a little bit clunky to write those rubrics in the Google Assignments feature, but once they're in there, you can always reuse them. So it would look something like what's on the screen. You can see that this is one that I used for narrative writing in the past. And then basically you just click on the grade that you want to assign students. In their view, it looks something like this. So the view right here, when you're grading it, shows those blue boxes that come up. And then there is a spot for you to give feedback. As you can see, I typed in some comments there for the student. But when they click on this arrow, then they can expand that and they can see exactly how they were graded for each part of the assignment. And that's especially helpful if you're giving multiple grades for one assignment, which is what I typically do to assess the different areas of their writing. Just in general, for any digital resources that I give, one thing that I like to do is I like to give links in the document to any of the supports that students might need. And in the beginning, kids are like, well, I don't know where to find this, but especially with modeling and after your first few weeks, students really will go in and they will get those resources on their own. They know they're there. So I find that really helpful. I often link my lessons or teacher samples in there. I will link any vocabulary lists if they need them. And those, again, you can include either multiple links and tell kids which to go to if you color code them, or you can just make that specific link for the kids that need it. So you're probably thinking, this sounds all well and good, but what if I don't have my materials ready in advance? We know having things planned several weeks out in advance can often be difficult. So what I do if I don't have that done yet, I link an empty document. So I know that's something I'm going to go back to later, and I'm going to add that information. But this way, when you create a template for students to type in, that link is already there. So you don't have to worry about putting that back in. You might have noticed on some of the examples that I had you guys looking at earlier, I do a lot of color coding. One of the reasons, it's really just helpful to say, hey, we're working on the pink paragraph today. A lot of students will just do either too much work you haven't taught them yet, so having that color helps, or if you give them a big document, it looks really overwhelming. Having that one piece, having that color where visually you can see for yourself if students are in the right place is often really just helpful. One of the other things that I like about it is if all the student documents are color coded, when they look over at another student's computer, they might not realize if extra supports are in there, if you add sentence supporters for some students and not others. They think, hey, we all have colored boxes to write in, that it looks pretty similar at a quick glance. So that's another thing that tends to be really nice about that. So I went over how students get started. If you are thinking, oh my gosh, this looks really overwhelming, it can be. One of the things that I have found really helpful is my school departmentalizes. So that's one of the reasons I've been able to dedicate so much time to writing. So if you're having trouble getting started, I find the best thing, just make a general template for all students. Then I make a copy, and in that next one, I will add in the supports for students that I think need it. So I tend to send everybody the same assignment through my MCPS, and then I go into that one that has the extra supports, and I just copy the whole assignment, and I go then individually to students' files. So say you have like 5 students that need support, I will just paste in the entire document that has that support in it. So it's real quick. I open it, I paste it, and it's right there. And it only takes me a few minutes to do that for all the students that need it. And I will tell you, since I teach 65 students writing, give or take, the fact that it only takes me about 5 minutes to go back and add that in to any document, because with 65 students, I have way more than you would in a general classroom of 25 that need that support. So it's really not a very time-consuming process. If you have any questions, my email address is there on the screen for you. And then if anybody has any questions that they want to ask now, please feel free, unmute, raise your hand, any of those strategies. And then I will hopefully be able to answer your questions for you.